More than likely, all of us here have heard the parable of the prodigal son. It's a powerful one, it's memorable, it's from Jesus speaking. And as we reflect on it, the core message that people pick up, which is certainly an important part of it, although not the only component, that core message to us, the challenge, look at this father and the story. The son rejects the father. The son gets his inheritance right away. The son goes off, disappears, didn't even plan to come back. But then, when things go bad, he does come back. He rehearses what he's going to do. Basically, he's come back because he has nowhere else to go. It could be very easy for that father to say, hey, yeah, now you're back here because you need me. Or, you know, I'm still harboring a grudge because of how you left. But powerfully, we get that story that Jesus shaped, that the father sees his son a long way off and runs out to meet him and embrace him and throw a celebration. That would have been very unheard of probably now, and even back then in a patriarchal culture where the father, you were to obey, and that's the way it was to be. And so when we look at that, yes, there's a challenge for every one of us to look at our relationships, especially people that may have hurt us, especially difficult circumstances or people that have disgusted us in some way. Are we able to forgive them the way the father forgave that son? Now, there's another component to that story I'm going to get to in a moment, but I want to share something else that kind of speaks to that other component. I'm sure just about everybody here knows it's 9/11. September 11th, 21 years after that horrible terrorism and tragedy in this country. And for me, I reflect on it like many of you do, but also because 1 year after that 2002, September 10th and 11th, there was a gathering of survivors, loved ones, who had lost family and friends on Flight 93 coming in. And they were gathering in Somerset County, which is where the plane went down. And in having this, they had an evening the night before. We had a dinner, and people would get up and talk about their loved one, maybe read a poem, sing a song, some sort of reflection. And I was there for that. And I may have told you this before, but I was there because people had asked me if I would come, because they knew these families were going to get together. Many of them were Catholic, but all of them were human beings who experienced loss. And would I come, obviously in my collar, and be a faith witness to the folks there, that they might have a chance, if they just needed to talk, if they wanted somebody to hear their story, that I would be there. And so after the dinner, I was situated where many people could see me. And I can tell you, I was up almost the entire night, listening to people's stories that still touch me deeply. I've probably shared some of them before, but I want to share this one tying in with the prodigal son. A woman named Alice Bingham, she talked to me. I saw her again at the 10-year anniversary, but she talked to me that day about her son, Mark. And in the situation, she was experiencing a lot of anger and hurt that she was getting over, but how deeply it cut her. And I mentioned, you must hate the people who did this. And she said, oh yeah, I'm still trying to work that through. But she said, Father, I have an even deeper resentment that I've been working through little by little. Well, what was that? Well, she mentioned that her son, Mark, who was 6'4", who was a rugby player, who was one of the big guys that stormed into the cockpit to try to get in there and divert the plane. She mentioned in media and to other people in those early days that her son was gay. Well, what happened, some of her friends and people in her own community said, Mark, yeah, look what he did. He was a hero. Why did you bring up that he was gay? Why say that? And of course, she was saying to them, and she was sharing with me, hey, I wanted people to know that. I wanted people to know that one of those heroes there was a gay man, my son. I wanted them to know that and understand that. And so she said, she had some resentment because some were still bothered by her approach. What added to it, and probably a lot of us can sadly identify with this, was what happened online, in the internet. So many notes when she had put some stuff out there came back to her. Why you're holding this guy up? What kind of mother are you that you ended up having a gay son? All kinds of other bitter stuff. Terrible. Obviously, she was hurt to the core. Obviously, she was angry because she felt the insensitivity, including toward her son or toward anybody who's gay. And we talked about that. And I remember asking her, I said, well, how are you doing since then? And she mentioned that over time she's getting better. And of course, I asked her, what has been helping you get better through all of that tragedy and hate? And she mentioned, first of all, never forget this, she said her son Mark was a Christian. And he did a lot of good in the community where he lived and reached out to people, especially people hurting, because his being gay, he understood hurt. And so he'd reach out to people like that. And he did so much, so good. And she went on to say, and my son, when he was alive, would forgive people who were making fun of him, who were putting him down, who were rejecting him, who were saying, how can you call yourself a Christian and be gay? My son forgave them over and over. And she said, I remembered that. As I wanted to remember my son, what his life stood for, what his life still meant to me and I hope to others. And she said, that touched her deeply. And she knew for her faith, her son's faith, that Alice had passed that faith on. Alice was a single parent, and this was her only child, and had really said to him, about Jesus, and that she would come to know, that he would come to know through her sharing back then, that Jesus was someone real, not just some doctrine to believe in, but a real human being, God become human, who came to show love and mercy and forgiveness, and to show his love for everybody. And as Alice said, Mark came to believe that and live that and find hope in that and want to share that with others. And then she said, it comes back to me. I taught him, and through the years since he's gone to God, he was teaching me and saying, yes, Jesus Christ, that I needed his healing. I needed his mercy, is what Alice said. And so I became more prayerful, more reflective of who Mark was, more understanding of Jesus himself. And what I mentioned earlier, that one powerful message, Jesus on the cross saying, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. And she thought of all those people who hurt her, who slighted her, who wrote those mean things. And with the help of Jesus prayerfully, she was able to say that and to let go of deep hurt, hate, and resentment. And hers was a powerful story, and she was sharing it with me and with others that day. Obviously, the reason I bring that up goes back to another part of the prodigal son story that we don't often pick up on. From the very beginning of that story, Jesus is talking because he's dining with sinners and tax collectors that were hated, and some of the Pharisees and Sadducees, the religious people, were saying, what are you doing with them? Why are you with them anyway? They were hateful. And then Jesus gives the story of the prodigal son. And in addition to saying how we got to forgive each other, the foundation of that parable is Jesus teaching about a father who loved his son totally. And he was mainly talking to them and to us that we see God, our heavenly Father, as that. That image he gave, that our Father in heaven loves us no matter what, that our Father in heaven waits on us to come home to him, that our Father in heaven rejoices when anybody comes back to the Lord in his goodness, and that our Father in heaven is absolutely about forgiveness and mercy, healing and hope. And so there, I mentioned at the beginning, when people hear that story and say, how can I ever forgive the way that father in the story forgave? Well, it's about God the Father, and what Alice showed, how can we forgive? If we try to do it on our own, we won't be able to. We'll probably still hold resentment. Alice did for a while. But over time, coming to realize, hey, I come back to Jesus. I come prayerfully to a real sense of his presence within me, she said. And that's the call for all of us, isn't it? The challenge to forgive, and the reminder that we need to be centered in a God who is absolutely about forgiving, and a God who wants us to be the same, and that we don't have to do it on our own. His amazing grace that forgives us is that same grace that's within us if we tap into it and are open up to it in prayer to be able to forgive others. So, an important lesson, because too many people have an image of God or use God today as a reason to hate, as a reason to be unfair, as a reason to persecute. Too many people. This God is not about that. Finally, I want to mention that at the end, right before closing the Mass today, I'll mention we have an initiative going on in our community, started by our parish council based on the synod, to do more outreach to the gay and lesbian, bisexual and transgender community in our area, which is right down near Highland Square, that we realize they're part of who we are, they're part of our neighborhood as a parish is, and how do we reach out in love. And again, very clear, whether it's folks there or anybody, we may not always agree with what somebody does. I mean, all of us do all kind of things, but the point is that should never be an excuse not to love. So, take a quiet moment. What do we all need to hear? Maybe it's about somebody in our own personal lives. We need the Lord to grace us to be able to forgive. Maybe it's about other circumstances. In a country where too often people are divided and look for a reason to hate, we need to be out there proclaiming a reason to love. Take a quiet moment.